The movie begins on a basketball court where Antoine and Kenny Tyler, two brothers, play a match against their rival team. The year is 1986. Their motto for each other is A&K all the way, created by their mother. Their father James coaches the team and directs Kenny to take the last shot for the win. Antoine wants to take the last shot, so he's upset that their father/coach is choosing Kenny to do it. During the last minute of the game, Kenny gets the ball and does his layup, ready to shoot the ball. However, he passes the ball to his brother out of fright. Antoine is confident that he'll score, but sadly, he misses the shot, costing them the game. That night, Kenny tries to cheer Antoine up, still upset about missing the shot. James tells them that all they have to do is stick together, be passionate, and anything can happen. In the present day, both Antoine and Kenny are a famed duo on their University of Washington college basketball team, the Huskies. They are two of the hottest players, and both are tipped for big futures in the game, especially Antoine. The brothers form a seemingly unstoppable partnership on the court. In the next scene, the brothers and their team celebrate their most recent win at a nightclub, but all they do is talk about basketball, even when chatting with women. Meanwhile, Kenny meets R.C. St. John, a sports reporter with whom he sparks an interest. He attempts to approach her, but she gets away before he can make a move. One day, during a game at UCLA, Antoine scores a slam dunk, but while hanging on the rim, he suddenly suffers a heart attack. Unable to breathe properly, he then thuds down on the court. Soon, the game is stopped and the paramedics arrive at the scene. Antoine is then taken to the university hospital. Sadly, the team loses their game without their big star Antoine. Later, Kenny and the other players are in the changing room, ready to visit Antoine at the hospital. Just then, Coach Peterson arrives to inform the team that Antoine has died on his way to the hospital. The team is devastated, especially Kenny. We learn that their father also died of a heart attack. Kenny later visits the basketball court and starts reminiscing about the good old days he spent with his brother. He begins to vent out that God isn't fair and eventually breaks down. Meanwhile, R.C. watches a distraught Kenny from afar. The following day, she approaches him at the college and apologizes for his loss. Kenny is frustrated that many news channels are coming to him for an interview regarding his brother's death. They wouldn't leave him in peace to mourn properly. However, R.C. assures him that she isn't there for an interview and instead offers him a shoulder to cry on. Later that day, Kenny and the team are practicing at the court. However, without Antoine, they start falling apart. They are not the same without him. Meanwhile, Kenny begins slouching and remains inattentive during practice. Later, Coach Peterson approaches Kenny and insists that he set his mind on the game. He encourages him to be back in his spirit as Antoine would want the same. However, still devastated by his brother's sudden death, Kenny thinks he needs more time. During one game against the California Bears, Kenny starts hearing Antoine's voice. Soon after, odd sequences begin to occur, and Kenny's team starts leading the game. In the last second of the game, Kenny unexpectedly scores a three-pointer from half court, leading his team to a surprising win. Everybody is astounded by the team's performance, and even the reporters are ready to write new stories. After the game, the rest of the players change and go home. Kenny is the only one in the locker room when he starts to hear Antoine's voice once again. When he follows the sound and moves forward, he sees a flash of bright light, and from there comes out a manly figure. It doesn't take much time for Kenny to realize that it's his brother Antoine. Surprised and scared at the same time, Kenny begins to run away, only to be forcefully stopped by his brother. Antoine reveals he aided the team supernaturally earlier in the game, and explains that the reason he's back is that Kenny called him. He is determined to get home the championship trophy, so he promises to help his brother and the team in future games. Next, the Huskies have a game against the Washington team, which is a tough match. Most of the reporters bet on the Washington team. While Coach Peterson is briefing the game's strategy, Kenny's teammates begin to question his concerning behavior, as only Kenny can see Antoine. At one point, the ghost brother starts pulling off pranks only Kenny can see. During the game, Antoine assists the team and helps Kenny slam dunk in the last second, which ensures the team another surprising win. After the game, Kenny and Antoine celebrate the victory in the locker room. Kenny jumps around hugging and tossing with his brother, but his teammates just see him dancing around crazily. They believe Kenny is still struggling to get over his brother's untimely demise. The following day, Kenny spots RC sitting in a pond nearby and approaches her. Although nobody except Kenny can see or hear Antoine's wisecracking prankster ghost, the sports reporter RC is determined to discover the reason behind the miraculous comeback the Huskies make following the slump that was triggered by Antoine's death. She tries to get it out of Kenny, but he doesn't tell anything to her. Kenny then asks if they can go out sometime, to which she gladly agrees. Later, Kenny goes for practice, but Antoine's spirit wouldn't leave him alone. As they have a friendly brawl with each other, his teammates stare in silence, thinking that Kenny has really lost his mind. Kenny then tries to explain his unusual behavior. He informs his teammates about Antoine's re-emergence, but they are skeptical. Kenny then pleads with his brother to make them believe that he exists. At first, Antoine refuses, but after a lot of convincing, he eventually gives in. Following this, Kenny asks one of his teammates, Danny, who is the shortest of them all, to slam dunk. Everyone is shocked when Danny slam dunks the rim, prompting Kenny to make them believe that Antoine helped them out. However, the teammates are still not convinced, and this pisses Antoine off. Hence, he slams every door and uses supernatural forces to finally persuade the team. Under Antoine's influence, the team storms through the competition and eventually make it to the national championship tournament for the first time in over a decade. During one game, RC's colleague is suspicious about Kenny and the Huskies, so he manipulates her into finding the truth. If she can find out what's going on and report about it, her story can storm the news channel, thus making her famous. Determined to inspect Kenny, RC goes on a dinner date with him. Kenny's relationship with her deepens despite Antoine's efforts to disband the two, believing RC is only out to get a story on him. On the date night, Antoine keeps on popping in, causing Kenny to act out weirdly, sometimes flooding his food with sauce and even sitting in awkward positions to talk with RC. His date finds his behavior very unusual, although she doesn't ask him anything. Before concluding their date for the night, Kenny attempts to kiss RC, but Antoine's spirit wouldn't let him. Once back in her apartment, RC begins to watch the Huskies game on the TV and notices something strange. She finally realizes that there's a supernatural force that's helping Kenny and his team to win the matches. Meanwhile, Kenny's teammates begin to have misgivings about Antoine helping them in their games. They realize that their game hasn't been fair, so they want Antoine out of the team. Kenny then informs Antoine, who becomes irate and wrecks the room they're in. After calming down, Antoine mentions that he never wanted to pass away. Hearing this, Kenny tells the team that he wants his brother to stay because he doesn't want to lose him again. In the meantime, RC prepares to submit a story to her colleague. But when Kenny discloses to her that Antoine is aiding the team, she eventually decides to throw away her story coverage. Meanwhile, the team makes it to the Final Four, and they have to play against Georgetown. During the game, Antoine's tricks don't work out as before, so the Huskies start losing points. He gets frustrated and slams Jared Smith, a close friend of Kenny's, straight into the board. This seriously injures Smith, and he's hospitalized for broken arms and a broken back. Later, while Kenny visits his friend at the hospital, RC arrives and tells him that he's letting his brother control his life even in death, and will never truly live unless he lets Antoine go. Kenny finally realizes that things are getting out of hand, so he decides to talk with his brother. He then goes back to the locker room looking for Antoine. When his dead brother reappears, Kenny tells him that they're cheating on the games, so he wants him out. Antoine expresses his desire to be in the final game and bag the title of the national championship. However, Kenny still resists. The other teammates also join in and tell Antoine's spirit not to interfere during the championship game, or they will voluntarily forfeit. Disappointed, Antoine leaves but lingers nearby. It's the final day of the tournament, and the team is all set to give their best. Before the game, Coach Peterson motivates the team by sharing his own story. When he was their age, he and his team had lost the championship title, and to this day it haunts him. This motivates Kenny and the team as they set foot on the court. However, since they're used to Antoine's help, they play poorly in the first half. They are down by a whopping 20 points. Some of the teammates want Antoine back so they can win the title, but Kenny thinks otherwise. Later, at halftime, he delivers an inspiring speech, saying that Antoine will always be with them in their hearts. They just have to believe that they can make it and play the game with full passion. Fortunately, the speech works and all the teammates are inspired. They rally back in an impressive second half showing, which brings the game close. With the score tied in the last seconds, the opposing team tries their best to defend, but Kenny manages to get his hands on the ball. Only 3 seconds away, he attempts the game-winning shot. Antoine wants to make sure that they win, so he tries to help, but Kenny tells him not to. Luckily, the shot goes straight through the basket, hence winning the Huskies their very first championship. The spectators and reporters burst in awe as the final whistle blows, concluding the game. Everyone cheers for Kenny and the Huskies. Meanwhile, before ascending into the afterlife, Antoine shares one final moment with his brother, reminding Kenny that he will always be with him. He then silently goes off into the distance under an array of lights. Coach Peterson sees this and asks Kenny if this was Antoine, their sixth man, to which Kenny admits, saying their mantra, A and K all the way.